Welcome to our Stand Together Maryland event. Maryland has a long, rich history in farming and land preservation. Today, agriculture represents the state's largest commercial industry and single largest land use, employing roughly 350,000 people and nearly 6,000 full-time farmers and growers. This is a testament to the state's productive soils, mature farming infrastructure, and an embedded commitment by Marylanders to preserve and protect their natural areas and open spaces. In 1969, Maryland became the first state in the nation to adopt a land preservation policy with passage of the Program Open Space Act. Less than a decade later, in 1977, Maryland created the Agriculture Land Preservation Foundation with the intent of preserving prime farmland and woodlands. Urban sprawl will always be a challenge for this small, populated eastern state. These progressive legislative actions, together with local land use regulations, have enabled Marylanders to retain much of the state's rural and historic character. In 1999, the Sierra Club ranked Maryland first out of the 50 states for open space protection. But there is a new threat to Maryland's farm and forest lands. SB 216, the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which went into effect in October 2019, dramatically increases the percentage of Maryland's electricity that must come from in-state solar energy facilities by 2028. Contrary to what much of the public has been led to believe, the solar panels needed to meet the requirements of SB 216 will not be limited to rooftops, parking lots, or retired landfills built within or close to urban areas. The aggressive time frame and sheer number of megawatts needed to comply with the mandate means tens of thousands of farm and forest acres could be transformed into solar electric generating facilities. The state's historic character, historic properties, cultural landscapes, archaeological sites, and breathtaking rural viewsheds are all at risk. Remotely sited solar facilities could also mean costly upgrade to Maryland's grid system in order to deliver the energy to other parts of the state. The race is on to install millions of solar panels wherever possible. Solar energy enjoys high public support, but such support assumes that solar facilities will be properly sited. Unfortunately, Maryland's track record for approving solar energy shows careless planning and a willingness to see the state's most precious and environmentally sensitive lands damaged and destroyed to meet the solar energy mandate. The risks are real, the damage is already happening, and the time to act is now. Thank you for attending our Stand Together Maryland event. You will hear from Maryland residents and organizations with expertise in planning, farming, and preservation as they discuss how valuable lands can be lost to solar arrays. Farmers will explain why most Maryland farms cannot afford to set aside acreage for energy production. Finally, we discuss the billions of dollars that Maryland ratepayers will pay over the next few years in order to subsidize the mandated solar build-out. Thank you again, and now to our host.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Watson, your host for this program. I'm a regional planner specializing in rural communities, and I live in Chestertown on the Upper Eastern Shore in Kent County. Tonight, you're going to learn about the challenges of poorly planned solar siting as we move into a future of more renewable energy. As Marylanders, we need to be thoughtful about how to do that in our state. So during this program, you're going to see 6 case studies that highlight different issues that are related to solar siting. We will end with a positive way to incorporate good planning into the solar siting process. Please use the chat column to add your questions and comments. We'll have a panel of some of our speakers at the end, and we'll be able to respond to as many questions as we can. Those of us tonight who are part of this program have come together to share our learning process. I was not an energy planner in 2013 when I became involved in the fight here in Kent County. And the others of us have had a steep learning curve, and we want to share all of that with you tonight. We need more Marylanders to join us to stand together. Once valuable farmland, forests, and wetlands are gone, they cannot be returned. And Maryland has worked a long time to fight them. Let's bring on Drew Schmidt Perkins. Drew, I'm going to ask you to say a few words about yourself, but I think many Marylanders know you because of your hard work through Thousand Friends of Maryland some years ago when you ended a 20-year stint with them, and you're still active in Maryland legislation. So introduce yourself for us.
Well, thank you for having me on this. This is an incredibly important topic that I'm pleased to be part of the conversation. I have been working on land use issues, like Elizabeth said, for 15 years. But before that, I was also working on energy policy at the state, local, and national level. So this issue sort of brings both to home, which is a nifty way for my careers to all jive. But I'm worried. I'm frankly scared for Maryland. Over the last 5-6 years, Maryland has been sadly demonstrating that having no plan for siting renewable energy has been terrible for both achieving these critically important goals, clean energy goals, which we simply have to get to, but also really harmful to our rural areas and to the communities in those rural areas. Maryland seems to be racing as fast as we can to a lose future rather than a win-win. But we can change that. We just need to really think about this issue holistically and a lot more strategically. Collaborative planning, as has been said, has been a critical part of Maryland's history. And we lead the nation in so many ways in how we plan for our development future. And we should be doing that on energy projects now. What we're seeing is the way we're doing it now is fighting project by project, huge conflicts, which have been expensive for the solar industry, it's been expensive for local governments, and it's been really expensive for community organizations and individual Marylanders. And that's not a winning solution. Fortunately, our decades in planning in Maryland give us everything we need to do it right. We just need to apply those principles to this issue. And really look for the ways that we maximize our benefits and minimize our harms, things that we're not doing now. To do better, we have to reduce the conflicts and make sure that we identify these benefits. But we should sort of look first at what's happening now and who's benefiting and why. Let's be clear, big solar benefits landowners. Landowners and farmers are not the same thing. Basically, about 60% of farms are actually leased from landowners. And that means when a landowner decides to lease or sell land for solar, that property is taken away from a farmer somewhere. And we're not growing more land, so that means that the farmer can't just go down the street and rent another 100 acres. It's gone. His agricultural ability is curtailed. So farmers have lost critical acres that can't be replaced. The agricultural economy shrinks, and only the landowner and the solar industry profit. It's also important to note that these solar industries are not local businesses. They're most often, out-of-state companies, and way too often, actually, international companies. So this is just dollars leaving Maryland and control leaving Maryland. And the jobs that are brought in to build these facilities are short-term and often not local residents. So this is not a good math for Maryland. It's hurting our rural economy, and it's not helping Maryland's economy. When we locate solar to minimize the harm and maximize the benefits, we have very, very different math. When we move solar onto, as we said before, landfills, brownfields, all this other disturbed land, we have a very different calculation to do. First, we have to admit that these projects are more expensive than building things out on green fields. Everything is, solar is too. Which means we're going to need more projects, and we're going to need to really do them strategically to make sure that we have these kinds of benefits. So what kind of benefits? Well, one, these projects on rooftops, on even huge facilities and closer to town, are frequently referred to as ladders to opportunity. These are the jobs that people can start off on the lower rung, gain experience, get more and more pay, and really begin to have the really livable wage. This is money that in turn stays in Maryland, helps build our local economy and solve any number of other problems with our local economy. Supports the individual, builds the local economy. While rural utility does not provide energy savings necessarily to Marylanders, whereas having these units on somebody's building, whether it's a big, huge warehouse or your own rooftop, reduces those energy bills, bringing savings to people, money that then stays in the community, gets reused out someday at restaurants and salons someday in our future. We hope that's happening again. But these monies stay in Maryland. So let's be clear, every industry has eyed our rural lands. Every industry has eyed that. Whether it's the home builders or the shopping centers or highways, they've all said, but it's cheaper, faster and cheaper to go out after our rural lands. Nothing's out there. This empty land, we got a better use for it. And the solar industry is no different. But all these other developments have been part of a comprehensive plan to decide where should we put the next housing unit, where should shopping go. And just like all the other development, our solar industry should be doing the same thing so we can actually do it right. Creating clear solar guidelines is working in other states. It simply is. Just look at New Jersey, the most densely developed state in the country, is doing it right. If they can do it, we can do it. So let's start doing it. You know, our ag land in Maryland's only about 20% of the whole state. Add in some of the other environmentally sensitive and historic lands, we're talking about a small percentage of the state that should be off limits for this kind of development. Why don't we go after that other 70, 80% and see what's there? What can we do to bring back lands that right now may not be on the tax base, may not be part of a solution, may be losing money for the local governments? What can we do to bring these lands back to help us bring those jobs in and rebuild our local economy? This is happening. We have a huge, one of the largest landfills solar projects in the country is in Annapolis. Anne Arundel just announced another one. We're seeing these projects everywhere. They can be done. We need to do more of them. So if we have a smart plan, Maryland will be much more easily able to meet these critical goals, do our part for the clean energy economy with less conflict, more benefits, and actually succeed, because the current method is not working right now. We urgently need to get moving on a plan. And I'm excited about this next part of this conversation where we learn what has been happening in Maryland and then where we can go. I'm going to sit back and listen and learn now from the rest of you all.
Thank you so much, Drew. This is great. You know, Maryland was one of the things that I've done throughout my career is land conservation. We had the first conservation easement in the country that was admitted as an automatic deduction by the IRS. It was protecting the viewshed from Mount Vernon. We've done such innovative things in this state from back then and all the way into the 1990s with smart growth and all the other good things that we've done. I just don't understand how we got there. And I'm not sure that we'll solve that tonight, but I think that we do see a way forward in innovative Maryland style. Okay? So thank you so much, Drew. And let's bring on someone else at this point. I'm going to do some definitions, but I think I'll do the definitions after we meet Judy Gifford. Judy is a passionate farmer who started her dream job as a dairy farmer at 39 after a career working in cooperative extension at the National Institutes of Health and on Capitol Hill. She learned many innovative ideas when she served on the Northeast Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, or SARE, Administrative Council. You will hear about her 60-acre farm that she works along with her husband, Robert Frye, a veterinarian. Let's take a listen to her explain her farming practice and why she feels passionately about saving farmland.
My name is Judy Gifford, and I own and operate St. Bridget's Farm with my husband, Robert Frye. We sell the milk from our 60 registered Jersey cows to Land O'Lake Cooperative, and we direct market grass-fed and finished beef to local families. Our farm is located in Kent County on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is home to one of the oldest working landscapes in the United States. All of our 50 acres are planted in permanent pasture, which is the best conservation practice for controlling soil erosion and promoting soil health. We've also planted over 50 trees, fenced off our waterways from cows, and have installed rooftop solar to generate clean energy. We have permanently preserved our farm with conservation easements and chose to put in rooftop solars rather than place them on our ground. It is alarming that 2,000 acres of farmland are developed every day in the United States. That is the equivalent of 40 farms like mine taken out of production every day, or 14,600 farms my size are paved over every year. Because of increasing population and decreasing productivity due to climate change, experts predict that we'll need to increase food production by 60% by the year 2050. That means every acre of farmland must be preserved. Farmland is a finite resource, and what we have is all we're going to have going forward. We can solve the problem of climate change and protect farmland by properly siting utility-scale renewable energy projects on sites such as brownfields, landfills, marginal land, parking lots, and other sites near where the energy will be used. Our planet is a complex ecosystem where all the component parts play a critical role. Once we begin to cover millions of acres of farmland with solar panels, the process will never end until we run out of this precious and limited resource. Once the land is developed, we cannot undo our mistake. Our soils will no longer play the vital role in photosynthesis and carbon sequestration. Our food security will be threatened, and a sense of place will be lost. We do not inherit the land from our ancestors, rather we borrow it from our grandchildren. Decisions that we make in the next decade must be thoughtful and balanced.
Thanks very much, Judy. You can understand why we've asked Judy to join us. She is passionate about saving farmland. You know, we have to feed 9 billion people perhaps by 2080 or 2090. How are we going to do that if we take away the richest farmland? And Maryland has quite a lot, and Kent County does as well. Before we move to our 3 case studies on utility scale solar, I want to be sure that you understand a little bit about the system. There's zoning in every community in Maryland, smart growth, and lots of planning that's been done. What's happening with utility scale solar is that they come under the purview of the Public Service Commission. Maryland was a pioneer, in fact, in creating these public service commissions. It's a model for other states. Was founded in the late 1980s to help with the siting of, coal-fired plants. So now the solar and wind energy comes underneath them. When a developer comes to the Public Service Commission with a site that is more than 2 megawatts, which is about, maybe 12 acres per megawatt when it's that small, but we're starting to talk 8 acres per megawatt above that, Public Service Commission is in charge, and they can preempt local zoning. So when you hear PSC, that's the Public Service Commission. There's another body called the PPRP, Power Plant Research Program, which is based in the DNR. And these are scientists and planners who do assist with environmental review on behalf of the Public Service Commission. And let me make sure that you understand that there is something called community solar. There's solar behind the meter, net metering, which is where farmers and you or I can put solar on rooftops or on some small patches of ground to serve a farm or a household or larger facilities. But with community solar, it's kind of in between. It's smaller, and and we're going to explain that after the first case studies on on this. And we're also going to tell you about the Renewable Portfolio Standard that was mentioned in the opening. And we're going to have a sort of a break between our 3 case studies of utility and then to our community solar. We'll talk a little bit about the money and jobs that are involved in all of this. So let's turn to our first 3 case study. The first is in Somerset County. It is far to the south on Maryland's eastern shore, the lower shore, and a really wet part of the landscape. As all of us in Maryland know, it's really wet down there. So you're going to see on the site map some of the contortions that were done to avoid the most protected wetlands. The project has so far affected 240 acres and is headed toward a build out of 1,000 acres. This next video will take you on a journey through Great Bay Solar inception, its approval, and the environmental impacts that this project has had during the building of the first phase.
This presentation will be a look at what happened to a solar development in a project after it was approved by the Maryland Public Service Commission in Somerset County, Maryland. This is a county on the lower eastern shore with abundant creeks, rivers, and wetlands that borders the Chesapeake Bay. This is the county that Pioneer Energy chose for development of a 150 megawatt solar energy plant. The project would occupy 1,000 acres of land, but the parcels that were leased were not contiguous. They were scattered over a wide territory within the county. The company submitted an application to the Maryland Public Service Commission for the required Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or a CPCN. Shortly after the project's application was approved 8 months later, Algonquin Power and Utility Corporation, a Canadian multinational, took control of Great Bay Solar. The environmental review document submitted by Great Bay Solar for the sprawling solar arrays and the string of power lines necessary to gather up all of the energy produced from the separate sites acknowledged the concerns of the impacts on the wetlands the project was surrounded by. The applicant would assure compliance with permits, adhere to mitigation measures during construction, and direct its contractors to follow the conditions put forward by Maryland Department of Environment, MDE, and the U.S. Corps of Engineers. But what happened was anything but adherence or compliance to the permits for the protection of the fragile environment in which they were building their green energy project. In 2017, during the construction of Phase 1, the first 75 megawatts of Great Bay Solar, the Maryland Department of Environment documented numerous and repeated permit violations at site number 1, site number 3, site number 4, and site number 6. These egregious violations resulted in a settlement agreement with Maryland Department of the Environment for $400,000 in 2018. This was the largest recorded settlement for wetland violations in the 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, with a $100,000 being the second highest fine levied by MDE against a coal ash waste management site. The violations at Great Bay's solar sites were not the only impact on the environment. Maryland Public Service Commission dealt with an application by Delmarva Power to build a 138 kV transmission line. The case centered on the need for the line, alternatives, and the destruction of important water and wetland resources posed by the project. This transmission line had no relationship to the reliability of delivering power to the lower Delmarva Peninsula. Rather, this line was needed as a direct result of needing to export power generation north. Great Bay Solar was the last of those generators to enter the processing queue at the Regional Transmission Organization, PJM, and without the injection of this power into the transmission system, no upgrade would have been required. The transmission line impacted a portion of the Pocomoke River that is designated as wild and therefore protected by Maryland law. Along with the violation of intrusions on the Pocomoke River, there were other significant, moderate, and cumulative impacts documented by the Power Plant Research Program to wetlands, critical areas, and other important streams and creeks in the path of the power line. The transmission line to move Great Bay Solar's power north was approved, and because of numerous miscalculations by PJM, the cost of the upgrade was not borne by the developer. The ratepayers of Delmarva Power bore that cost.
And we are going to talk now about, if you think this case was bad, let's talk about how much worse it might have been in Charles County. These are, we're told that these are trade-offs that we've got to accept, and let's see what happened in Charles County. First, let's bring up the first slide here. I want to highlight what Allison Prost said of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation about this project. She said an incremental increase in solar energy should not come as a matter of course at the expense of Maryland's highest quality waters and the mixed forest land that currently protects them and provides numerous other environmental services. Any degradation must meet the highest standard for justification and fully address every regulatory requirement enumerated in the state's program. So let's bring on our friends Bonnie Bick and David Curzon. We're going to hear why they renamed this project. Hello, Bonnie. Hello, David. Why they renamed this project from Maryland Solar 1 to Georgetown Solar. So why don't we hear from both of you? Let's see, Bonnie, first up, what was the project proposed to do?
It would have, had it gone forward, it would have clear cut 257 acres of forest land. It's highly valuable for its pristine streams and its important bird area, which David will tell us about.
Yeah, David, could you talk to us about Bonnie called you up when she learned about this project. We're going to hear a little bit more about that. She called you up. So what are the impacts that you discovered as you looked at this project? Let's go to the next slide.
Well, this project is in the middle of the Nanjemoy important bird area. And important bird areas are the most essential habitats for birds in Maryland. That's actually it's a program that goes across the world. With Audubon is the US partner with BirdLife International. And when we identified the Nanjemoy IBA, as we call them, it was the real value was in its contiguous forest. It's the biggest contiguous forest in southern Maryland, and this project would have permanently destroyed a 250-acre parcel, basically stamped a hole in the middle of that forest. And the real value of a forest landscape is the fact that it's continuous.
So David, as the director of bird conservation for Audubon, DC and Maryland, we're going to show the next slide. Could you just tell us a little bit more about the birds that are in that area?
Sure. There are a lot of forest interior dwelling species living in Nanjemoy important bird area. These are things that birds that many people might be familiar with, things like scarlet tanager and many of the warbler species. But there are some fairly rare species in that assemblage which actually lived on the project site or very close to it, things like the eastern whippoorwill. And this bird has been rapidly declining for a long time. Many of these forest birds have. So there was a number, many warblers, other forest interior dwelling birds, things like Kentucky warbler and hooded warbler. These are birds that need a healthy forest understory.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think we all need to imagine these places. I was on the Nanjemoy, not on the Nanjemoy, on the Pocomoke, and got to see a prothonotary warbler for the first time.
They're beautiful.
If you go down there just in a few, not too long from now, you see the fringe trees that are sort of like little waterfalls of wildflowers down. Thomas Jefferson loved that tree. So we've got some spectacular natural areas in Maryland. Bonnie, how did you find out about this project? And tell us a little bit more about why let's go to the next slide, and why you named it Georgetown Solar.
Well, actually, it was an accident that I found out about it. I was at a compressor station hearing against a Dominion frac gas compressor station, and which was stopped, by the way, by the Mount Vernon viewshed. So that was very good. But after everybody cleared out and we had lots of people there for that, I noticed one of my friends still staying there. And I went over and found out that, my goodness, she told me in just a minute what was happening. And it was, a terrible thing, because I was, in addition to all of the impacts that David mentioned, for me, it's also, I'm a huge solar supporter. So I was concerned because I felt like it was a mistake to put down solar and fragment this magnificent forest. And it was one.
Could you just talk to us briefly about, while we've got this slide for the Georgetown campus up, just tell us what you tried to do with Georgetown, and then we're going to go to the sort of process and get done
right.
with it.
But just that it would have been counterproductive to have gone forward with this, because so many people would have been so negative about it, and we want solar to be successful. And this slide shows that the red line is the size of the clear cut for the solar panels, and the yellow is the size of the Georgetown campus. And we did have events at Georgetown, and I can tell you every tree there was so valuable to the campus, and the thought of cutting that much forest, it was really unacceptable. And
did Georgetown accept it?
Well, Georgetown had signed a contract with Orge's company, who was out of Cyprus, actually. Their headquarters is in Cyprus, and they were very hesitant to try to get out of that. I mean, they did a study, and they promised, many groups came together on this, and they promised that they would share the study with us, but then they decided not to. And fortunately, this did not go forward.
Parents, we've got here we are. We're going to talk a little bit about the process. Bonnie, I've known you for what, 20, 30 years now as an activist along the Potomac. You're a native of Southern Maryland, Oxon Hill. And, you're calling David, pulling together all these folks is a fascinating story. It's, as a planner, I'm having a hard time with the fact that, as someone as active as you, missed the fact that the whole Public Service Commission was, making these decisions. So actually, what happened is the Public Service Commission, just as with Somerset County, the Public Service Commission approved this project, right? But they had two conditions. Required local permitting, which is why you were at that hearing, or why that hearing was being held that you wound up at. And it required another condition. Let's go to the first one and talk to us about that for a second. Let's get to the next slide. So it passed, right? Charles County?
Unfortunately, yes. And I could go into details, but it's very difficult if you don't have enough time to really, what happens actually is we made a presentation. We know that the Board of Appeals was very taken with what we said, but then the applicant got to comment on our comments and changed our direction. I mean, and we had no way to further.
They got the last word. They got the last word. Let's go to the next condition. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so here, Bonnie and David, you guys were the heroes. So tell us this story. What happened? The project had to get another condition. What was that?
Yeah.
David, do you want?
Sure. Yeah, that was basically a non-tidal wetland permit from the Maryland Department of the Environment, and that's because there are two high-quality streams that cross the property. And when Bonnie called me up and told me about this project, I decided to write a letter and detail the bird value of the site, and to say that we request a public hearing on this. This probably should not go ahead because we were very concerned about the loss of forest, the fragmentation of the forest, but also, of course, the impact on those two high-quality streams. When you looked at the project plans, they showed a lot of the clearance of the land would have undoubtedly really damaged those streams. So, the permit that we were seeking to get denied was for the streams rather than the forest, but of course, forest and streams are tightly linked in the ecosystem.
And so Ben Grumbles, basically, if we look at the first quote that we had from Alison Prost earlier, Ben Grumbles agreed with Alison and the two of you. While Maryland strongly supports the increased use of clean and renewable energy sources, these two proposed projects, there were two, would harm the nearby high-quality streams in Charles County and threatens our continued restoration progress in the Chesapeake watershed. This is an unacceptable trade-off for the environmental benefits of clean energy. So we're thinking trade-offs. So thank you very much, Bonnie and David. We really appreciate your time.
We'd like to
And we'll hear from you guys next on the panel. Okay.
Sure.
All right. So let's go to the last big solar utility scale project, and this is where I come in a little bit. This project was proposed by Apex Clean Energy in Kent County, Maryland. It's known as Mills Branch Solar, and it was a project that first drew me into the fight back in 2013. It took 5 long years to win. Let's hear Janet Christensen Lewis, the chair of Kent Conservation Preservation Alliance. You'll meet her in a minute. She's our narrator, and let's hear about this project.
Kent County, Maryland is a small county located on the Delmarva Peninsula. This eastern shore county is bounded on 3 sides by the waters of the Chesapeake Bay and the Chester and Sassafras Rivers. It is a land rich in history and is agricultural and rural in character. Apex Clean Energy, a renewable energy developer from Virginia, decided to build a 60-megawatt solar generation plant in Kent County in 2015. Although the county's land use ordinance had established districts within the county that allowed utility-scale solar, such as in the industrial and employment zone districts, Apex chose to ignore those land use ordinances and proposed Mills Branch Solar on 500 acres of prime farmland in a priority preservation area and in the agricultural zoning district that excluded utility-scale solar development. Despite objections by Kent County, Apex Clean Energy proceeded with the project. They filed an application with the Maryland Public Service Commission in December of 2015 for a Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, or a CPCN. Approval of electric generation in Maryland is delegated to the Public Service Commission, or the PSC, and the PSC has the authority to preempt local land use ordinances. Based on our understanding of the significance and fragility of a landscape that could be destroyed by improper placement of industrial projects, particularly one of the size being proposed by Apex, Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance joined Kent County in opposing Mills Branch Solar, becoming an intervener in the application process conducted by the PSC. The importance of the vernacular landscape in Kent County was documented in a 2019 report underwritten by Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance with help from a Bartus True Providence Preservation Grant given by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The authors of the report wrote in the executive summary that a large agricultural landscape on the East Coast that has the high level of continuity of land use and surviving physical characteristics as is presented in Kent County is among the rarest of the rare. Besides the violation of Kent County's land use, which is protective of its prime agricultural land, there were many other aspects of the project that were concerning. For instance, Apex Clean Energy argued that the Forest Conservation Act, a state law that was adopted in the land use ordinances of Kent County, should not apply to them. Furthermore, the area where Apex planned their project was included within the boundaries of the Stories of the Chesapeake Heritage Area, which is comprised of large viewsheds of working farm landscapes. Those landscapes, important to the heritage area, would be compromised by the project, and the impairment of that landscape could not be mitigated by landscaping, as Mills Branch had proposed. Testimony presented on behalf of Mills Branch by the developer Apex supported that there were areas of Kent County available for utility-scale solar in zoning districts where such a use is allowed, but they failed to present any evidence that they had actively evaluated an alternative location. At the end of over a year of legal proceedings at the PSC, Judge Sober, the public utility law judge, rendered a decision. He found that many of the arguments made in opposition to the project were persuasive, and therefore the project would be more negative than positive in its value of creating benefits to Kent County and to the state. He denied the application for the CPCN requested by Mills Branch Solar, LLC. A case could be made that the process worked. Apex Clean Energy, with a multi-million-dollar net worth, was defeated in their quest to override the will of the residents of Kent County. The evidence presented by Kent County and Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance ended in vindication, but at what cost? This outcome came at great expense to private citizens protecting their farmland, heritage, and culture from massive industrialization. Both the county and Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance were required to squander resources, time, and money on legal representation just to maintain their right to govern land use, protect their heritage, and to ensure that farmland continued to be recognized as the highest and best use of their land. The development of utility-scale solar is happening on the farmland in the rural counties and poses a threat to the agricultural sector and the people working in farming and farming-associated industry. What is clear is that there is a lack of planning on Maryland's part to place guardrails around the development of renewable energy projects requiring vast amounts of land in order to produce energy. As long as Maryland gives developers free rein, they will continue to site their solar projects where they see the highest profit potential, which is on the prime farmlands of Maryland, and residents will continue to pay a price.
So we could argue that the system worked. We actually won. Kent County and Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance won on the merits. But that was back when the solar carve-out was 2.5%. By 2028, we will have to produce in Maryland, our goal is to produce 14.5% of solar energy in the state. That doesn't count things like Georgetown Solar. They're going to sell that electricity out. So we have real challenge because the conditions under which we won that case do not exist anymore. So we've talked about all the impacts that we can have solar and properly sited on farmland and environment. Janet Christensen Lewis is going to give an overview of what the RPS is. I'll let you figure that one out, and what it is supposed to do, and how much it has and will in the future cost. Janet is a transplant from the West Coast. She and her Eastern Shoreman husband live and work on a 320-acre organic farm located on the Chester River. Her appreciation for Kent County and its highly significant working cultural landscape has been built through her associations and work with Kent Conservation and Preservation Alliance, where she serves as its chair of the board of directors. Janet?
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth. I guess we've learned a lot since those early days when we didn't know what EPC was, right?
Oh, it was really hard to go through. Yeah. So much time, so much volunteer time on all our parts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we'll bring up the slides and I'll get started here. So I'm going to introduce you to the current Renewable Portfolio Standard in Maryland. The 2019 legislation was introduced as the Clean Energy Jobs Act, but its underlying purpose was to increase the share of renewable energy that Maryland required the ratepayers to support. A payment system has been created not to pay developers for the actual electrons generated, but for the clean energy attributes assigned to those electrons. These payments are called renewable energy credits, or RECs, or solar renewable energy credits, SRECs. Next slide. By 2030, the RPS requires that Maryland's utilities buy credits equal to 50% of the power consumed. 33.5% of this comes from renewable energy like wind and hydro, generated in or out of state. However, solar generation is in a special classification. The solar credit can only come from solar generation produced within the state. The purchase of solar energy credits must reach 14.5% of all retail electric consumption by 2028. The cost to utilities responsible for buying these required credits is passed through to the ratepayer. Next slide. From 2014 to 2019, Maryland ratepayers were billed $439 million for the renewable energy credits attributable to non-solar generation and $218 million for the solar built within Maryland. The total cost to ratepayers was $657 million. This expense was for a time period when the RPS requirement was set at a maximum of 25% with a 2.5% in-state solar carve-out. Next slide. But with the doubling of the RPS to 50% and a 580% increase in the credits needed from solar produced in-state, the future is going to get more expensive. The non-solar renewable energy credits we can estimate a range between $2.4 billion and $3.4 billion. 70 to 80% of this money will flow out of Maryland in payments to developers in surrounding states. Next slide. The ratepayers of Maryland are looking at a bill of $176 billion for the costs associated with solar carve-out. These billions of dollars take into account only the direct transfer of money from ratepayers to developers and shareholders of renewable energy. It does not cover the costs transferred to the ratepayer for upgrading the transmission and distribution system, which is needed to accommodate the renewable energy transition, nor does it include the outlay of tax expenditures for federal subsidies. Next slide. So what can we expect to see in terms of Maryland job creation from the Clean Energy Jobs Act? Maryland actually had a 10% decrease in jobs in the solar field in the period 2016 to 2019, despite an 18.5% increase in solar generation. The Power Plant Research Program, in a 2019 publication on the impacts of the RPS, documented the fact that Maryland, with the largest solar carve-out of all states in the regional transmission organization of which Maryland is a part, experienced the largest solar job loss. Next slide. California, which ranks first for solar output in the nation, experienced a similar decoupling of solar sector jobs in the same time period. In fact, this disassociation of jobs was experienced nationwide. Next slide. The bulk of the jobs created in solar generation is in construction and installation. However, it is the stable jobs created in operation and maintenance to keep the to keep the installed solar systems operational that are presumably the sustainable jobs left after construction is finished. These are the jobs that are necessary into the future to do the wire repairs, replace broken panels, and mow and maintain grounds around solar arrays. These O&M jobs represent a small fraction of the overall job total. For Maryland, it's about 5%. Next slide. The fraction is consistent with the 4.5% nationwide. Next slide. The future for these stable and permanent O&M jobs in Maryland has been estimated by economic modeling to be only 15% of all jobs created by the RPS. Next slide. What about future jobs created by the Clean Energy Jobs Act? Exeter Associates, in coordination with the Power Plant Research Program, delivered a report to the Maryland General Assembly in December of 2019. In this report, they estimated by computer modeling that job creation would amount to about 1,943 full-time equivalent jobs per year in the state, inclusive of all direct, indirect, and induced jobs. However, one of the important caveats included in the report was that the estimated job modeling does not account for a shift to solar employment from other sectors. Also, the modeling does not take into account job losses, which might be caused by the RPS policy. Jobs that could be lost in Maryland due to increased cost of electricity or in the agricultural sector because solar displaced productive farmland. Next slide. Each direct, full-time equivalent job will cost Maryland ratepayers an estimated $140,000 per full-time job. Thank you.
Now to another type of commercial solar. This is solar that the PSC regulates and oversees, but does not require the applicants to attain a CPCN and therefore does not have the preemption authority that we've discussed in the 3 preceding case studies. Community solar, which is 2 megawatts and under, is governed by local land use ordinances. So what's happening locally? First up, Keith Olinger, a resident and farmer in Howard County. Howard County's preservation program was the result of alarming loss of farmland and open space in the mid-1970s and the early 1980s. After spending millions of local taxpayer dollars for decades to remove development rights from farmland, Howard County decided to allow community solar on this preserved land. Keith is a member of the National Association of Conservation Districts and has held many leadership positions in Maryland, including a position as vice chair of the Maryland Agricultural Commission. Keith has squeezed a lot of farming into his 20-acre Porch View farm.
Did Howard County lose a lot of large parcels of farmland?
We had some very big developers, the Rouses, I guess, and whatever, that were interested in doing the ideal communities, and so they bought up huge swaths of farmland. And I'm not against development. It's just I am pro farming and food production. Farming is an ecosystem. You hear a lot of people say, well, to raise a child, it takes a village. Well, it's similar in any ecosystem. You have to have a base foundation of supply and support and demand.
Howard County has a preservation program that is unique. Can you tell me about the amount of land that can still be preserved and also the solar development that is taking place on this preserved land?
So where we are now is we are essentially under 2,000 acres left that is potential to be preserved in Howard County, but that could be also developed. And we have about 22,000 acres, a little over, in the active preservation program. What we've been told is that the non-preserved land, when the solar companies have to compete with development, they can't pay the prices to be able to get the land for solar. I'm not against solar power. My preference is that we create the incentives and the structure to be able to put it where the actual needs are. If every home had solar power that could do it on their roofs, then you wouldn't need to put it on our farmland. In the original legislation for Howard County, it was wide open. They could, the companies coming in could have done pollinator habitat. They could have raised the posts and done agricultural farming underneath it. They could have kept the posts a little lower and done grazing underneath it. They could have, done a medium type height and done vegetable farm. There was no limit or restrictions put in. It was wide open what they could have done. The original projects came in, they did none of that. They fenced it out, and from a perspective, it doesn't look nice. I mean, it's not, not that matters necessarily. A pig pen doesn't necessarily look nice either, but the issue is they didn't do that. They put in the solar panels, they fenced it out, they said everybody needs to stay out, and they didn't try any alternatives to work within the community to make it better. They're not worried about my community, they're not worried about my neighbors, they're not worried about the future of agriculture. They're worried about their bottom line. It's not the solar preservation program, it's the agricultural preservation program. And agriculture and solar are not the same thing. It's solar is not farming. And we ended up agreeing that we could go up to 2 megawatts in community solar. We would feel comfortable with, but we didn't think utility scale solar was appropriate on land that was preserved for agriculture.
Thank you, Keith. Let's move to Montgomery County. You're going to see a pattern here. We're talking about the counties that are most influenced by Baltimore and Washington, D.C. Montgomery County has a zoned agricultural reserve that was established in 1980. This farmland protection program has been called the most famous, most studied, and most emulated program of its kind in the United States. It is a rare example of a large swath of rural farmland in proximity to urban development, Washington, D.C. Some of the land is permanently protected, but much of it is not. Only zoning keeps it available for permanent protection someday. What has happened in Montgomery County to the protective zoning of that reserve? Caroline Taylor, Executive Director of Montgomery Countryside Alliance, and Christina Bostic, the Alliance's Senior Conservation Associate, will give us an update. Caroline and Christina could not join us live this evening because, like many rural residents, they are internet challenged, but I think you'll hear their message loud and clear.
This is Caroline Taylor, Executive Director of Montgomery Countryside Alliance, coming to you from the Agricultural Reserve.
I'm Christina Bostic. I am the Senior Conservation Associate at Montgomery Countryside Alliance.
We are the team from Montgomery Countryside Alliance that worked with our colleagues over the past year on reining in a proposal to allow for industrial commercial solar arrays in our master planned agricultural reserve. Last Tuesday, the full council took the issue up for a final vote. I'm happy to report that with a 7-2 vote, they agreed with the stakeholders' recommended amendments. Let's go back a little over a year ago when the zoning text amendment was proposed and was to be fast-tracked during the pandemic. It took a lot of muscle, a lot of citizen action with many hundreds of emails to the council asking for a more systemic approach to climate change, to wait for the county's climate action plan, to not rush this through during a pandemic. That was met with deaf ears on the part of the proponents of the zoning text amendment. But the good news was that the council, at the time, Council President Sidney Katz heard from the agricultural community, and set up a work group, which in some ways was destined to fail. There were 4 industry or proponents of the amendment. There were 4 of us that were conservation or agricultural stakeholders. So while we were largely deadlocked, what did emerge was a crystallization of what needed to happen with this use in this place. And that was that it needed to be designated as a conditional use with the appropriate scrutiny and transparency and public participation. And moreover, we needed to protect our most productive soils. The next step as a conditional use is to set the sort of regulatory framework, the conditions that will be attached to the use that when it goes to the Board of Appeals.
So much of the concern about the CTA when it was introduced on the part of farmers was that it would take acreage away from the 60% of farmers in the ag reserve that lease their land. We even heard reports of farmers losing their land leases once the CTA was proposed, not passed, proposed. We at Montgomery Countryside Alliance run a land link program where we are trying to get the next generation of table crop producers matched with long-term leases here in the county. Solar companies were offering just many, many times more the lease amounts to landowners.
Thanks, Christina. So as you see, that was our central argument. There were a number of others, but if I were to offer any advice to you, I would offer the following. Build a strong, robust coalition. By the end of our efforts, we had a 62-member coalition, which, by the way, was ably led by Clean Water Action, who came in and rolled their sleeves up and really helped. Our local groups, Sugarloaf Citizens Association, West Montgomery Citizens Association, Conservation Montgomery, these groups really took this on, and we worked collaboratively, and we're available if anyone would like to talk. And if you have more questions after you look at the website, don't hesitate to let us know.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Christina. This is our last case study coming up. We're at the hour, and we've got about 10 to 15 more minutes of presentation, then we'll stay to take questions. So we've asked my longtime friend and colleague, Teresa Moore, to join us to tell us about the situation in Baltimore County. She'll be joined by Susan Minnemeyer of the the Chesapeake Conservancy. I met Teresa years ago when she was staffing the Maryland Greenways Commission, and I was working on protecting the Potomac River. She was also instrumental in one of Maryland's great initiatives of the 1990s, another model, to identify the state's green infrastructure and encourage greater protection of natural acreage that means so much to all of us as residents and communities across Maryland. Today, she's the executive director of one of the state's oldest and most successful local conservation organizations, the Valleys Planning Council. The council was founded to support the famous Plan for the Valleys, done in 1962 by Ian McCard. That plan laid the groundwork for much of Baltimore County's outstanding land use planning and policies and influenced the development of the smart growth policies across the state that we began implementing in the 1990s, those local and state government. It also led to Ian McCard's famous 1969 book, still used by planners worldwide, Design with Nature. Teresa?
Thank you. Pleasure to see everybody, and very nice to have this topic. So if I could have my first slide. What our concern was here in Baltimore County was that with all the financial incentives that were being offered to induce the solar industry to get going in Maryland, that we would end up subsidizing the conversion of farm and resource land to an industrial use. And we had spent so much time and effort to create these wonderful policies that it was just a real concern to see that it might be, just easy pickings for a new industry. So we thought here in Baltimore County that it would be a no-brainer that before choosing farmland as the first opportunity to put solar in, that we would make the most of opportunities on already developed or degraded lands. And as you can see by looking at the map on the left, that red line that you see outlining the light yellow area, that's our growth boundary. It's called the urban-rural demarcation line. And everything outside of that, north and on the east and west of it, that is all zoned resource conservation in Baltimore County. 2/3 of our county is set aside as resource land. And 90% of our population lives inside the URDL on that light yellow portion of the county. So we really have a huge tradition of protecting a large amount of our land. And you can also see the blue areas. There are 3 reservoirs. Then Baltimore County has the watersheds for these 3 large reservoirs that provide the drinking water for almost 2 million people in the Baltimore metropolitan area. So we got caught flat-footed, like much of the state did, because we didn't plan ahead for solar. It's not in our master plan, and we just didn't see it coming. So our council, scrambled like a lot of people did to create regulations. And what our county council did was set a limit of 10 projects per councilmanic district. And if you look at the map on the right, you'll see that we have 7 councilmanic districts. And I think the expectation was that that would sort of, spread out evenly the number of projects that each councilmanic district got. But as you'll see, there was quite a preference for the ag priority preservation area. And that's the area on the left map that's in the light green. That's where all our easements are and where a lot of the prime soils are. And so even though we have a limit of 10 projects per district, we have a waiting list in District 3. And also District 4 has a lot of prime soils and resource preservation and resource ag preservation land. And they've got the next biggest number of applications, 5. And then we have 2 other districts that just got 1, and we have 3 districts that got none. So basically what we found is that if you can't put it on farmland, they're not that interested in doing it. And we found the same kind of skew within our BGE territory, which has, about 8 counties in it, because each county's done a little differently with their regulations. Baltimore County, which allows it on farmland where some of our neighbors don't, we're getting the bulk of the territory's applications for community solar. So next slide, please. We decided to actually take a look to see if we could actually have enough sites on what we consider optimal sites to handle our fair share of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, because we are pro renewable energy and we do want it here in Baltimore County. We just wanted to find out if we had enough of the best places to put it. So we hired the Chesapeake Conservancy to do a study for us to find sites that would maximize the potential for solar energy production and minimize the impacts to farm and resource lands. So I'd like to introduce you to Susan Minnemeyer, who is with the Chesapeake Conservancy, and they did a marvelous study for us. Susan, you're muted.
Thanks, Teresa. Yes, so we aimed with the study to answer the question, where should solar go and how much of this, what we call the optimal sites, are available for solar within Baltimore County and City. So at the Chesapeake Conservancy, we produce high resolution land cover and land use data that allows us to measure important lands like prime farmland or environmentally sensitive land cover like forest cover down to individual parcels. We applied this data to come up with a method for estimating the number of optimal sites in the city and county and how much energy could be produced with these. So next, I'll go over our principles for the study. So, as many of us have said, we believe solar energy development is critical to meet our climate mitigation goals, and careful siting of solar energy can maximize the benefits of renewable energy and reduce the adverse impacts. It's important that we also ensure equity of solar energy benefits so that everyone can access the cost savings of solar energy. But we recognize that policies and incentives for wise solar land use may be necessary. Next, we estimated how much energy should be produced in the area, and to estimate the fair share, we came up with measures of energy consumption in Baltimore City and County. This region uses nearly 20% of the electricity consumed in the state. So we set an ambitious goal for the amount of sites for renewable energy we would need in this area. Next, we looked at land use conflicts. So we aim to identify sites that could avoid these key land use conflicts. So solar on prime farmland removes some of the best land from food production, while loss of forests and important lands for wildlife and climate, as mentioned in the case study on the Charles County, Georgetown example, these are lands that are important to preserve. Meanwhile, degraded lands offer a great opportunity for putting abandoned, degraded, or contaminated lands to productive use. Sites like capped landfills, brownfield sites or other contaminated sites, or even land adjacent to wastewater treatment plants offers an opportunity to put land back into productive use and offset the energy required by facilities like wastewater treatment plants. Solar in the built environment, however, is very compatible with other land uses. Solar enhances commercial and residential property uses. Meanwhile, parking canopies provide shaded parking and electrical vehicle charging on site. So many great amenities come with this. In terms overall of what sites are optimal, we identified degraded lands, as I mentioned before, parking lots over an acre in size with an opportunity to put in parking canopies, rooftops, both residential and commercial. And we also identified preferred ground-mounted sites. And these are sites where ground-mounted panels were not, sites with opportunities to avoid prime farmland or other environmentally sensitive land. And these were a second tier of options after optimal sites. So next, I want to go through some examples of optimal siting. Annapolis Solar is the largest closed landfill project in North America. It's 80 acres in size and an excellent example of putting degraded lands to better use. And then in commercial solar, Target has rooftop solar on many stores across Maryland. This one is in Middle River, Maryland. The IKEA in Baltimore, Maryland has rooftop solar and just put in new solar parking canopies. So these two companies are big leaders in this area in terms of meeting their greenhouse gas reduction commitments with optimal solar siting. We also wanted to answer the question of, are optimal sites enough? So in our study, we found enough sites in Baltimore City and County on these optimal sites to meet renewable energy goals if just 8% of these optimal sites prove viable. And we recognize, when we're looking at rooftop solar, that many individual buildings might not prove able to support solar on the roof, or there may be individual reasons a particular site won't work. But we found that if just 8% of optimal sites prove viable, these sites alone, without even looking at the preferred ground-mounted opportunities, could be used to meet renewable energy goals. And then just to sum up, our recommendations from the study were, yes, there are enough optimal sites that they can provide a great share of the renewable energy production for solar. As a second tier option, ground-mounted sites that avoid prime farmland or ecologically sensitive lands can provide additional opportunities. And third, as we've said, these optimal sites may not be as inexpensive as using farmland for solar, but by providing incentives or policies that encourage solar development in these areas, we can steer solar energy production to the places with the least land use trade-offs. So I'll close there. I'd like to thank everyone for following this event.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was wonderful. And you can get the report at the Chesapeake Conservancy's site, right? We've gone through a lot of information tonight, so I just want to recap. What have we learned? Let's close with a few takeaways. First of all, Maryland has not planned for locating solar and saving our best resources from being destroyed. We are losing agricultural land, threatening wetlands in the Chesapeake Bay, and degrading our forests. And the in-state solar carve-out is putting pressure on the Public Service Commission to approve utility-scale solar projects on farmland and environmentally sensitive lands. We looked at jobs and costs. There is a tremendous financial burden being placed on Maryland and its ratepayers. The cost of jobs generated by the subsidies is high, the number of jobs created is limited, and the job losses, particularly in farming and natural resource-based industries, are not subtracted from job gains. So in community solar, communities are feeling pressured also by the 14.5% carve-out to change land preservation policies. We saw that in Howard, Montgomery, and Baltimore County. But there are best practices for solar siting. Maryland can be a pioneer in this. Chesapeake Conservancy studies show that there is a better way forward. We can protect important lands and site solar development appropriately. So we're going to bring the panel together, everyone who has been able to stay for this, and Mark Nelson is going to facilitate and ask the questions for us. Mark, where are you? And could you introduce yourself, please?
Hey, everybody. Glad to join. And fascinating presentation. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois, because I am one of those young people who has only lived in cities, is addicted to cities, will probably always live in cities. And I have to say, your presentations tonight were extremely interesting to me to see a world that, quite frankly, very few people in my generation will ever know about. I think we saw and I'm sure it's just scratching the surface, a level of depth of, I suppose, interrogation of what the plans mean that are made in cities for those of you outside of cities. And I have to say, I'm worried about a few things, and I'm looking forward to asking a few tough questions and seeing if we can get a little bit more perspective. I am managing director at Radiant Energy Fund, and I do a lot of stuff in nuclear energy. And one of the most common things I hear about is just discussions about how we can use all energy sources. But what we do not hear a lot about is what happens to solar once it's mandated and thrown out to the world. So I've got a number of interesting questions, including one from one of our listeners tonight, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about it. So from Dan tonight, there's a question about if it takes so many tens of millions of acres in the US of farmland to grow corn for ethanol. He's asking if this means that we should save that space and substitute the corn ethanol growing for solar. And I know as an energy person, I'm a little uncomfortable with using really large areas of land for energy crops when you can do it very efficiently with small sets of land. But I wondered if any one of you would be able to handle this question. Can we just substitute one type of energy crop for solar and have the same environmental effects?
Gosh, who's going to take that one? Give us an easy one. Go, Drew.
So I'm going to try. This is not my area of expertise, but I think this is exactly, Dan, why we actually need to be planning for our energy future. We need to be looking at all the different ways that we produce energy and figure out the best ways and the harms. And we know that producing energy through corn for ethanol is actually not that energy positive. So that doesn't seem like that's a great idea. Maybe we should be swapping out those lands for food that is better for us and growing the agricultural industry a little bit differently. But what we shouldn't be doing is allowing ourselves to be played because there's other bad land use happening. That doesn't mean a solar energy also gets to be a bad land use operator. We need to all be doing better on all these different situations.
I like that. I think that's a good approach, that one bad land use does not justify other problematic land uses, which honestly leads me to my next question. And I'd be interested to hear from maybe even more than one of you. Where does farming go? Assuming this is food farming, food for people, where does farming go if it's kicked out of Maryland?
Well, I'll take a first shot at it. I mean, when it leaves Maryland, we see that it goes to other states where they have less environmental controls over farming. In Maryland, we have one of the highest percentage of farms into cover crops, as opposed to Iowa and Ohio. They don't use cover crop. They have a lot of erosion. So they also, one of the things that happened is they converted a lot of woods and forest to farmland for the ethanol issue, right? And so if farm production is going to move out of Maryland, it's likely to go into those places, but it's also likely to go to the Amazon. I mean, we export huge amounts of our product to other countries. And if they're not going to get our product anymore, if the United States isn't a producer anymore, we already see that we have a lot of imports. And in the Amazon, that's where they're cutting down the forests. So we have prime agricultural land. We have high productivity. We have farmers that are experts in what they do in the United States, and particularly in Maryland. And we don't want to lose that expertise, land, and have it be exported someplace else.
Janet, just a moment here. Does Maryland care when Maryland has clean energy goals for solar and it's losing that same function to the Amazon forest? Is that counted against the economic or environmental efficiency of solar as an energy source for the state?
Well, I'm not quite sure what that is, but I think when we look at our clean energy goals, we're pretty concentrated on us. We're concentrated on Maryland. We're not thinking about the mining that has to go on around the world with and we're dealing with loss of land in Maryland tonight. But all energy that we produce has secondary impacts on us and has secondary impacts on the world and on the environment. And, you know, solar isn't any different. It's not special in any other kind of way. Yes, it doesn't produce CO2. Yes, that's important that we do that, but it still requires mining. It requires cement. It requires steel. It requires a lot of energy just to make it. You know, there's a lot of issues around it. So.
Okay, well then I think that sets up our next question I've got, which is farming itself environmentally friendly? And perhaps as a way to really poke the beehive, so to speak, is farming or solar better for pollinators? Because I've heard of some studies recently that said that solar panels can work well for pollinators.
I'm laughing because that's one of Janet's favorite, let's say, bee in her bonnet.
I vote for Janet to answer.
Yeah, me too.
I think Bonnie, weren't they going to put pollinator habitats into the forest and make it be better than it was?
Yes, it will end up being like a productive forest, and that the pollinators would be very happy with the clear cut and solar panels because of the planting of pollinator plants. I'm sorry, I consider that like sort of a greenwash on a bad decision. I mean, really, that's always what it gets down to when they're discussing these issues is, well, just think about the pollinators, don't think about the loss of the forest and the fragmentation and the impacts that would have, but think about the pollinators. And I mean, I'm all for pollinators, I'm all for solar panels, but we have to, we're in a situation now with climate. We need to protect all our forests and our farmlands. Keeping them productive is extremely important. So we just have to find these acceptable places for solar, which, and as the Chesapeake Conservancy said, and thank you for this, I want to read that report, is there is enough space. It just has to be properly sited.
So hearing that answer, I'm not sure you're going to like the next question, but I'll try it anyway because it's one that I've heard. Maybe 10% of each farm could be given up for solar. That way, no one has to be completely pushed off of their farmland. So I guess the question I would ask, and maybe this is two questions for two people, would 10% of each farm being given up for solar work for farming? And then on the other hand, would it work for solar?
Well, I mean, if you look at Howard, two people that we had on, Howard and Judy has 60 acres. She pastures it. She's protected her waterways. She's put in trees to protect those waterways, and she's pastured that land. And if she had to put in 10%, which would be 6 acres. I mean, Judy put in solar. She put it on her roof. If she had to take 10% of those 60 acres, that would be 6 acres of land. She would have to diminish the cows that she has. If we did it on our organic farm, we would have to take out 332 acres out of our farming operation. And we can't run tractors and grow alfalfa underneath solar panels. So the people that we supply the organic alfalfa to, the dairies here in Kent County that we're suppliers for, and the people that supply us with our seeds and the truckers and everything else would be diminished. It would impact, as Keith says, the entire farming ecosystem when you start looking at taking that amount of land out.
Mark, what I'd like to suggest is that farming, let's take farming as a given and ask, why is it that we're always being asked to defend the 20% of Maryland that's farms when there's, to steal from Drew from her opening presentation, there's 80% land out there, and the Chesapeake Conservancy has shown us how we don't need to take a single acre of farmland, and we can actually retrieve land that's wasted and put it to good use for our communities. So why do we have to always defend farmland or the forests? You know, Maryland has pioneered, as we've said in this presentation, but it just goes on and on and on. Every decade, we have innovated and found ways, and we have cared as Marylanders about these really special places. Let's look elsewhere. Teresa?
You know, we did find 3,400 acres of rural land, open land that, you know, isn't prime farmland or rich ecological land that could be used for ground mount. We make that a second tier of preference. We prefer the degraded sites. And I guess one way of looking at it is, if you're trying to reduce carbon, why not put it on a place that's not doing anything, not contributing towards the atmosphere in a positive way at all? If you put it on a parking lot, you're adding shade, and you can plug in your electric car when you go to work. It just makes so much sense there. Why would we take something that's vegetated and has living soil and change that if we don't have to?
What I'm hearing from these is that there may be a high environmental cost to cheap solar. Certainly in the energy world, in the carbon policy world, there's a concept of carbon leakage. That is bad policy, chasing carbon emissions from a high environmental concern area to lower environmental concern areas. And I guess what we're hearing here is that there's such thing as ag leakage, or even land leakage, shall we say, a footprint issue that may have a fairly big impact on the environmental friendliness of solar policies. Well, Janet, Bonnie, Drew, Teresa, Elizabeth, Susan, I think you've answered most of the questions we have for you tonight. Any final remarks or comments for our viewers?
No, I mean, I appreciate everybody that came on tonight to help us out, and to the people in our listening audience who've stayed with us.
We'd like to know of more partners out there. So if you feel akin to us, we hope you'll contact us, because we'd like to share information and experiences.
Bonnie?
And I just wanted to say how important it is that when you do start working, identify a problem, that everybody works together, and that all of the people that have the same goals, it's really the way that we have success with our environmental efforts.
So Drew, you might have something to say to working together.
Absolutely. We have to solve this problem. We have to. It's urgent. It's now. We've shown in Maryland how not to do it. It doesn't work. Let's figure out how to reach these goals, reach them together, while supporting farmers, while supporting communities, while building a better economy. We can do it. We have to do it. And I think that we in Maryland can actually become the leaders on this issue instead of the losers on this issue.
Thank you. Well said, Drew. Why don't we all say goodnight? Thank you so much to all of our listeners, and we'll be on YouTube in the future, and contact us, please. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for attending this evening. As we work to persuade our policymakers of the importance of planning for the future of all of Maryland's resources and adding more solar to meet our state's energy demand, we need your help. Please get in touch and let us know you will join us.